Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 11.2 seasonal update is arriving very soon, in about a week from the time you're watching this video, if you're watching it on the day of release. But with that, with the brand new seasonal update, one of the best parts about a new season is a slew of class changes and new ways that we'll be able to play our classes in the upcoming raid, Mythic Plus, and PvP. This time around, however, the amount of class changes everybody is getting is quite massive, from the number of different talent adjustments or reworks that we've been getting over these past few weeks, but also together with some brand new tier set designs that allow for even more build crafting and customizability. As our classes are not just getting one tier set bonus that we'll have to change our talents and playstyle to adapt to, but rather we're getting two tier set bonuses, one for every hero spec that you have access to, with Paladins getting a different tier set bonus for Templar, for Herald of the Sun, and Lightsmith that changes slightly depending if you're Protection, Holy, or Retribution. Now, we have covered other tier sets so far for other classes, and some of them can definitely be very complicated, but it looks like Paladins are getting some rather straightforward tier sets that are a bit self-explanatory. But the actual bonuses on their own can be quite powerful, and maybe some of the strongest and some of the more interesting ones that we've seen so far. And today I want to take a closer look at all the Paladin tier set bonuses coming out in 11.2. As always, if you guys want to see more class guides and content updates for 11.2 and beyond for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. The first thing I do when I go over the different class tier sets is first of all the visuals, and I gotta say I really like the Paladin set. The whole Cavalier horse look with this plume, the helm, it's definitely super unusual from World of Warcraft. Doesn't even feel like a WoW set, doesn't feel like a Paladin set, but I think it looks so good, so unique. I'm a big fan of this one in particular. I think this one has to be one of the best sets in my opinion. There's also different recolors for the sets, which is something that you can't expect. Like some of the different sets we have is the Raid Finder, which isn't amazing, though not a lot of Raid Finder sets are. I mean, it's got this green and purple. Not a terrible color combo, but not a big fan of it, honestly, either. Normal looks fantastic. Proper, golden, Cavalier, Paladin, heroic. Got this blood elf look around it, almost like Legion Fell. But of course, Mythic, I think, looks stellar. The Gladiator set, the Ivory look, looks clean. And then, of course, we got the Elite set, which is a little bit more of this fiery version. I feel like no matter outside of the LFR, no matter the recolor, except the bad LFR one, every one of them looks excellent in my opinion. It looks so good. It gets me so excited to pick up a Paladin going forward. From there, though, I am going to go with the actual bonuses, and I am going to mostly look at them from the perspective of, or really do them in a more popularity order, starting with the Templar, then going into Herald of the Sun, and then doing the Lightforged. Some of these are going to be a little bit more involved, and some not as much. Paladins, however, I feel like are on a little bit of a simpler side when it comes to their sets. They're a little more self-contained within the hero specs specifically. Something we see with a number of specs here and there, though most classes will have like one simple one really complex, and one somewhere in the middle. Paladins, I feel like, are on the simpler side of the complexity if this were a scale. Starting with the Templar, which is all about dropping the big hammer of light. And the tier set is going to play around that, but also the hammers like the Empyrean hammers in particular. The true set reads, your Empyrean hammer deals 20% increase critical strike damage, and its critical strikes have a 50% chance to grant an additional stack of light's deliverance. So this gives you a little bit more of this crit synergy with Empyrean Hammer. So the more Empyrean Hammers you can get, whenever the critical strike, they also deal additional damage with AoE, which again gives you a bit more crit scaling. But then they also stack up Light's Deliverance, which allows you to use the hammer, the Empyrean Hammer, or rather the Hammer of Light ability, more regularly. So this means noticeably far more uses of the big hammer ability, and some crit scaling I think can be good, especially when it comes to the end of the tier, where some classes, unless you have like really good mastery scaling or haste scaling, classes can start falling off a little bit. For Paladins, giving them some more crit scaling with the tier set, I think is at least leads them in at least one specific stat direction, but also in a playstyle that feels really smooth to play, since those hammers are very noticeable. The foreset reads, Hammer of Light deals 35% increased damage to its priority target, strikes 3 additional secondary targets, and can now be cast one more time after Wake of Ashes. So this one is a little odd in the way that it's designed. More priority damage I think is a really good thing, because Paladins a lot of the times, especially in content like Mythic Plus, basically have to choose between a single target build or a large cleave AoE build. Allowing them to go for a bit more AoE while giving them more priority damage through a tier set, for instance, can be good in some cases. And priority damage for the hammer in particular is going to be big value because there's a lot of focus damage. That's a lot of funnel damage where you'll get free AoE, but that funnel damage is very, very important. Attacking multiple enemies with the hammer is good, but kind of like selectively. The hammer itself will deal additional damage to on the tooltip for nearby enemies, and you're not necessarily making that damage for smaller groups stronger. You're making the priority damage stronger, but the AoE damage within smaller groups essentially doesn't really improve. What the hammer foreset improves is in larger AoE situations, larger AoE content, where you're doing massive pulls. That hammer cleave damage can now hit more targets, but like if you're fighting 2, 3, 4 enemies, like smaller cleaves, what the hammer was decent in, it doesn't improve that. So that feels a little weird that there's no improvement there. It gives a bit bigger range, but it doesn't necessarily make smaller cleaves better, which again feels a little awkward. But allowing you to use the second hammer or hammer a second time with the ability can now be cast one more time after Wake of Ashes is noticeable, because you're basically just getting more hammer value for that hammer, which definitely gives you a lot of different ways that you can apply the hammer. Like you could follow up with a hammer into a Divine Toll, into yet another hammer, and then you could basically drop in the hammer a lot more regularly, since especially off of crits, you'll be able to generate more Empyrean hammer stacks, which can generate you even more light hammer of light uses. So this overall is going to be a noticeable playstyle. Being able to hit harder with those hammers, being able to get more hammers in general is also very good, whether it is inside of your Wake of Ashes window or outside of it. It is going to be something that is a noticeable playstyle overall. And being able to follow up from one hammer into another hammer is still satisfying, because you're getting more of what you enjoy out of the big Hammer of Light playstyle with the Templar build. That being said, I really do wish the foreset was a little bit better at I like the idea that it expands the number of targets that you can now cleave with that foreset. I just wish they increased that secondary target damage even a little, because that would have helped them with like a 2-3 target smaller cleave situations in particular. But it feels like there's like a gap where the tier set just doesn't quite cover, which feels weird, feels awkward. You can use 2 hammers for the price of 1 in a Wake of Ashes, so that still is a gain. I just wish there was like a little bit of gain when it comes to smaller cleaves, because there you're not necessarily getting like value increase, if that makes any sense. It is a very, very detailed, very specific issue that I have with the tier set, but for the most part it feels good. It's one that actually is impactful. You're getting more hammers. Hammers deal significant damage. You're seeing constant big crit numbers on your screen, so it doesn't necessarily speed up your gameplay, give you more haste, or do any of those other benefits, but the dopamine hits are definitely very, very impressive with this set. It is a fun tier set, it is a fun playstyle, as it's very straightforward. You're getting more hammers, which deal quite a significant damage for Retribution Paladin. For Protection Paladin, we always try to take a look at the tier sets from a defensive value, because for tanks, it's all about how is this tier set going to increase my survivability? Because obviously the tier set is going to be good for damage, you're getting more hammers, but how does that translate into raw defenses? The damage is likely going to be a very, very fun aspect, but defensively, this is actually not a terrible tier set, because it essentially becomes, you get more uses out of Hammer of Light. And Hammer of Light does have benefits outside of just offense, like with Sacred Crusade, using Aya tier will grant you a Holy Barrier for a portion of your health, 15%. Hammer of Light also heals you for 50% of your max health, increased by 2% for each additional target you hit. And the fact that you can now have a larger pool of enemies you can hit, this gains direct benefits. You can also hammer twice in a row, so even double the benefits, and any overhealing this effect does converts it to a Holy Barrier instead, which grants you more shielding. So the more hammers you use, the more defensiveness that you can get out of an offensive action. On top of it, with Undisputed Ruling, Hammer of Light grants you Shield of the Righteous, which is more defenses, erupts a Consecration beneath its target, so less Consecration management, and grants you Haste, which can additionally grant you more resources to be able to get defenses online quicker, or to potentially be able to churn through resources quicker for more cooldown reduction. Also, I2 gains 3 Holy Power. So there is defensive components with the Templar itself. The weird part, however, is the 2 set, which still grants you crit scaling, which is weird for tanks because in most cases, critical strike, usually, unless a tank has some kind of affinity for it, you don't necessarily stack it as a priority stat. A lot of the times you get defenses out of versatility, which is just raw damage reduction, haste for more resources to churn out, or mastery because it has some sort of a defensive component. Technically, protection paladins like Prot warriors do have parry based on their crit strike, so the more crit you have, the better your parry is against pure physical damage, which in some cases can be a pretty big issue for protection paladins. In previous expansions, they were great when it comes to defensive cooldowns, but never great when it comes to passive mitigation against like natural normal damage that a lot of enemies are going to do. This is a lot more prevalent in expansions like Battle for Azeroth, where they were a great off tank with a lot of utility, but never a great main tank for raid content, which also is translated in a weird way for them when it comes to their viability in Mythic Plus, where you're the only tank of the group. So for them, critical strike can be a bit of a weird stat in general. As of right now, protection does actually invest a decent bit of crit when it comes to raids, but in Mythic Plus, it actually looks for mastery, which grants you a bit extra defense specifically, especially when it comes to those consecrations that further reduce the damage you take, increase your block chance for against the melee damage, but that constant consecration damage reduction is a pretty big component of your overall survivability. So for them, if they are looking to get a little bit more tanked up, it is going to be a question of how much crit investment are they going to go for in the next patch. Because crit means you're taking away points out of haste, which is probably not possible. You wanted a resource generation. So that means you'll probably have to take out points out of mastery, but then you're potentially putting yourself in a bit of a danger zone. Yes, you're able to get some crit scaling with Empyrean Hammers, and those Empyrean Hammers can give you Light's Deliverance procs, which means even more Hammers of Light, which does have defensive value, but I'm wondering if it'll be enough to sacrifice it, as some of the recent VODs and logs that I've seen on Prot Paladins is they are getting played on PTR, but they're also running into some defensive issues that some of the other tanks are not quite running into. So it'll be interesting to see if this is something that'll give them some push potential. I think the tier set for them is probably going to be fine for raid content, where critical strike is a decent stat that they are able to invest into. But in Mythic Plus, when it comes to really pushing high-end content, I wonder if crit will be enough to really leverage going full on into Templar. And from there, we can move on into the Herald of the Sun playstyle, which for some players feels a little bit too passive, although it can be kind of impactful, especially as Holy, since you get a lot of leverage out of the Eternal Flame ability. Though for Retribution, it just feels like you are putting dots on things and connecting them with yellow lines, and it's all you do really, is just putting up lines on enemies and doing a lot of dot damage, which Retribution Paladins are not really, over the past few expansions, really been keen on, that being their priority playstyle. Though Herald in some cases can be very, very strong, but the tier set is going to be a little bit more self-contained. Dawn Light's healing and damage, which is the priority mechanic of this playstyle, gains 30% more value. And you gain Solar Wrath after Avenging Wrath fades, causing Sun's avatar effect to linger for an additional 5 seconds. So Dawnlight is the priority damage and ability that you will primarily use in single target situations. You can spread Dawnlights a little bit, but primarily you'll end up putting it on a handful of targets, and a portion of that damage or healing will radiate to enemies or allies with a soft cap of 5 targets, but it has a little bit more of this single target, priority target leaning to it. The second part is the Sun's avatar. After Avenging Wrath, during Avenging Wrath rather, you become linked to Dawn Lights within 30 yards. So you'll be able to link yourself to Dawn Lights, creating lines of radiant damage between you and those linked enemies. And if you position yourself in between of AoE packs and Mythic Plus, that can deal a significant bit of damage. Activating Radiant Glory applies 1 dawn light to nearby target, so this will scale based on your wings. So if you are going for short wings as a Retribution, you will only be able to put up 1 dawn light. If you're going for, however, things like a 1-minute wings or 2-minute wings, you can increase the amount of targets that you're going to be hitting with this effect. So this will have some scaling for Retribution, but in most cases, Paladins I think are going to stick to Wake of Ashes wings, so you are going to be looking at lower numbers. But you'll be able to put up 1 dawn light onto nearby allies or enemies and increase dawn light's duration by 20%. So basically, you'll be able to maintain the capstone effect to let it linger for a second longer or a couple of seconds longer after wings falls off. So it essentially makes this like post Sun's avatar window even better. So it's almost like a lingering wings effect following the initial version of your wings. When you're playing this playstyle as a Retribution specifically, if you can get a decent enough procs of Crusade to give you a decent bit of uptime, you can actually extend it so that this version of Retribution Paladin is never outside of a version of wings. Even after real wings falls off, you'll have the Solo Wrath fake wings, and then you'll have basically a 10-second line in between where you have no wings for a while. So in a sense, it kind of extends that wings uptime or a wings-like state for Retribution in particular, so you're spending quite a significant bit of time with either real wings or with either fake wings, further empowering all of your damage and effects. Which means that for Holy Paladin, it's essentially the same effect. It's going to increase the effectiveness of your Dawn Light's healing, gives you a little bit longer duration of your fake wings post whatever type of wings you end up using, as well as give you Solar Wrath buff, which will scale depending on the wings that you have. And lastly, we have the tier set for the Lightsmith. Hammer and Anvil's healing is increased by 15%, and it could also be activated by Crusader Strike at 75% effectiveness. Hammer and Anvil is the talent right here. Judgment's critical strikes cause a shockwave around the target, dealing additional healing to the target's location. So this could deal quite a decent bit of overall healing. And it also gives you a little bit more crit scaling, and now it works not only for Judgment, but Crusader Strike. So for Holy, there's a few talents you can now utilize in order to potentially make Judgment and Crusader Strikes a higher priority playstyle for you in order to get more uses. And you will want to get more uses out of Hammer and Anvil, as it actually increases your scaling with your armaments. With the aforesaid, Hammer and Anvil also grants you a stack of Masterwork, causing your next Holy armament to cast one lesser version of itself on a nearby ally for each stack. So as you are judgmenting the target, and if you can get a good enough amount of crits and should incorporate Crusader Strikes, you will be getting the stacks of Masterwork. So you'll be able to apply one extra lesser version of an armament when you do use one. So you'll have lesser shields and lesser weapons that you can now send out to nearby allies. As of right now, this effect does cap out to 5, but it's still going to give you a significant bit of shields and armaments that you can send out across the entire group. So if, let's say, I target this mage and I send him a Holy Bulwark, you'll see that there's going to be now smaller bulwarks all over the place. I think it's supposed to hit some of the NPCs if they're close nearby, but I don't think it hit any. Though me and the mage did get a lesser bulwark on top of a greater bulwark. So a real bulwark wielding a huge shield, but also gaining a smaller shield as well. This could also apply for the weapons as well. If I'm able to get enough of these procs, then I should be able to send out lesser weapons across me and the mage. And there I got a lesser weapon. Your next 5 abilities will deal additional holy damage or healing. So weapons themselves will have charges, whereas the sacred weapon doesn't have charges and has an additional effect, which is by itself, like I said, very self-contained. It just amplifies the amount of buffs that you can provide to everybody. So it really comes down to the tuning of these buffs. But they've been doing some aggressive tuning with some of these lesser armaments, lesser shields, lesser swords, usually just nerfing a lot of them down quite a significant bit. But it does give you more ways to spread a bulwark across multiple allies, whether it's in a raid to put it on more than just you and like the tank, but usually this is where it goes on. The lesser bulwarks can now coat a larger group of allies with an absorb, which in a lot of cases in raids and dungeons can be better than just like a proper heal, as it will absorb the next hit even if they're at max health, providing an extra coating of protection. The weapons also is really good, as it's going to give you more your damage, because All of these weapons do go back to your damage as a holy paladin, so your damage contribution in a group does go up a little bit. Though sacred weapons that did change for holy, that they are now more likely to affect healers, so that could potentially result in more healing contribution that you're doing within a raid content. But if you do put sacred weapons on allies that are DPS, you could potentially gain a significant bit of overall damage contribution as you put those buffs on a raid team. Switching this over to protection, the tier set doesn't change too much. The hammer and anvil's damage is increased by 15% as you are getting a damage aspect of it instead of healing aspects, and it can also be activated by Blessed Hammer at 40% effectiveness, since Blessed Hammer essentially replaces Crusader Strikes. And just like Holy, you have this crit damage scaling with Hammer and Anvil, as Judgment critical strikes, but also now Holy Hammer critical strikes will do the shockwave that'll deal additional damage at a target's location. But again, you're now, if you want to get more value out of Hammer and Anvil to get more value of a tier set, you are again encouraged to invest more into critical strike as a protection Paladin. So you can't escape some form of crit scaling for the spec at all. And we talked about earlier with the Templar, Mastery is a great defensive option. Haste can be great for utility. Versatility gives you raw damage reduction. Crit can be good, but crit scaling in defensively is not nearly as massive as Mastery, at least when it comes to right now in Season 2. This will potentially change protection to be a little bit more invested into crit, because you can't escape it no matter which build of Prot you end up playing, whether you play the Templar or whether you play the Lightsmith. There is some sort of a crit encouragement in either playstyle, either way. But with that, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you guys did enjoy this update or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord community, especially if you want to keep up with the last minute changes as well as guides for the patch 11.2. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.